Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Astotara Satashishima, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nanta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, New Goloka Dham Ki Jai, Ganga Devi Jamuna Devi Ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 40, The Killing of Kamsa. And we're on text 39. Sanityadvodvignadhiyatamishvaram Pibhan adanva vicharan swapan shvasan Dadarsha chakra yudham agrato yatas Tad eva rupam duravapamapa Sanityadodvignadhiyatamishvaram Piban adanva vicharan swapan shvasan Dadarsha chakra yudhamagrato yatas Tad eva rupam duravapamapa Sanityadodvignadhiyatamishvaram Piban adanva vicharan swapan Tadarsha chakra yudam agato yatas Tad eva rupam duravapam apa Sanityadodvignadhiyatamishvaram Piban adanva vicharan swapan shvasan Dadarsha chakra yudam agrato yatas Tad eva rupam duravapam apa Sanityadodvignadhiyatamishvaram Piban adanva vicharan swapan shvasan Dadarsha chakra yudamagrato yatas. Tad eva rupam duravapamapa. Saha he, Kamsa, nityada, constantly, udvigna, anxious, dhiya, with mind, tam, him, Ishvaram, the Supreme Lord, piban, while drinking, adan, eating, va, or, vicharan, walking, swapan, sleeping, shvasan, breathing, dadarsha, saw, chakra, the disc weapon, ayudham, in his hand, agrataha, before himself, yataha, because, tat, that, eva, same, rupam, personal form, duravapam, very difficult to achieve, apa, he achieved. Translation. Kamsa had always been disturbed by the thought that the Supreme Lord was to kill him. Therefore, when drinking, eating, moving about, sleeping, or simply breathing, the king had always seen the Lord before him with the disc weapon in his hand. Thus Kamsa achieved the rare boon of attaining a form like the Lord's. Please repeat. Kamsa had always been disturbed by the thought that the Supreme Lord was to kill him. Therefore, when drinking, eating, moving about, sleeping, or simply breathing, the king had always seen the Lord before him with the disc weapon in his hand. Thus Kamsa achieved the rare boon of attaining a form like the Lord's. Purport. Although born out of fear, Kamsa's constant meditation on the Supreme Lord eradicated all his offenses, and therefore the demon was liberated upon his death at the Lord's hands. Commentaries. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Because of his absorption in Krishna due to fear, Kamsa was purified of his offenses and could get liberation. This is the intention of the verse. Jiva Goswami writes, in relation to this, Kamsa's liberation is described. Kamsa constantly saw Krishna because of great fear in his mind. He now attained the radiant form which he had constantly seen. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajat yante kalevaram tam tam evaiti konteya sada tad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his present body, in his next life he will attain to that state without fail. Bhagavad Gita 8:6. This is like the trapped insect which becomes a wasp. Such a form was rarely attained. Previously, when he was Kalanemi, he was killed by Ajita, but did not attain liberation. How did he now attain liberation, though he was so sinful? Krishna was the supreme form of the Lord, Ishvaram, manifesting all of his unlimited powers. And Sanatana Goswami writes, in relation to this, Kamsa's liberation is described. Kamsa constantly nityada saw Krishna, or he saw him in such a way to produce liberation, nityada, with intelligence full of fear, thinking of him as an enemy, or he thought with the idea of destroying the Lord's eternal abode. By taking the role of the Lord, he thought he could destroy his fear. The Lord manifested his upraised chakra for killing him. Because he saw the Lord in front of him, he gained a form given to demons, composed of Brahman. not a form as a personal associate, rare for yogis. Va indicates everything. He thought of the Lord while walking, breathing, and all other activities not mentioned. It was previously mentioned that he thought of the Lord while walking and eating. How did he now attain liberation, though he was so sinful? It was by the power of the Lord, or the Lord manifested his unlimited powers. Though as Kalanemi he was previously killed by Vishnu, he did not attain liberation. Now he attained it by thinking of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada writes in Krishna book, from the day Kamsa had heard he would be killed by the 8th son of Devaki, he was always thinking of Krishna with his wheel in hand. And because he was very much afraid of his death, he was thinking of Krishna in that form 24 hours a day without stopping, even while eating, while walking, and while breathing. And naturally, he got the blessing of liberation. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, Sada tad bhava bhavitaha. A person gets his next life according to the thoughts in which he is always absorbed. Kamsa was thinking of Krishna with his wheel, which means Narayan, who holds a wheel, conch shell, lotus flower, and club. According to the opinion of authorities, Kamsa attained Sarupya Mukti after death. That is to say, he attained the same form as Narayan Vishnu. On the Vaikuntha planets, all the inhabitants have the same bodily features as Narayan. After his death, Kamsa attained liberation and was promoted to Vaikuntha Loka. From this instance, we can understand that even a person who thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as an enemy gets liberation or a place in a Vaikuntha planet. So what to speak of the pure devotees who are always absorbed in favorable thoughts of Krishna? Even an enemy killed by Krishna gets liberation and is placed in the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is all good, anyone thinking of him either as an enemy or as a friend gets liberation. But the liberation of the devotee and the liberation of the enemy are not the same. The enemy generally gets the liberation of Sayujya, which is merging into the Brahman, and sometimes he gets Sarupya liberation. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vaishya Pradesh Karine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So our goal is to be 24 hours a day thinking about Krishna, absorbed in Krishna. And here we have an example of someone who 24 hours a day was thinking about Krishna. Kamsa was disturbed by anxiety and fear that Krishna would kill him. So in everything he was doing, he was thinking about Krishna. And not only that, he was seeing Krishna in front of him with disc in hand. So while drinking, while eating, while moving about, while sleeping, that means even he was dreaming about Krishna. And then even by simply breathing, he was always thinking about the Lord. So isn't this the goal of what we would like to achieve? You know, the goal is, as in the Padma Purana, it's stated, Smartavya satatam Vishnur Vishmartavyo na jatuchit. And it means that we should always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna at any time. And all the other rules and prohibitions that we have are just supporting this one thing. Always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. So, of course, in this case, Kamsa was remembering Krishna in an unfavorable way. It was not devotional. It was out of fear. And however, because Krishna is so, so merciful, even to somebody like that who is thinking about Krishna out of enmity, out of fear, out of anger, gets liberation. That's the kindness of Krishna. In many places, it says that most of the demons who get killed by Krishna actually merge into the Brahmajyoti. In this case, because he was meditating so much on the form, he actually attained a form like the Lord's. Imagine that. If somebody is trying to kill you and then you give them such a great gift in return, like to have a spiritual form like the Lord's. So that is the mercy of the Lord. So 2 points that I would like to bring out in this class is, one point is how kind and liberal Krishna is. And the other point is about absorption in Krishna. So I was meditating on how kind and liberal and generous Krishna is, how he opens the avenues so wide, giving so much varieties of ways that we can approach him. If you think about the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there's one section where Krishna says one thing, like the highest standard. Always think of me, be absorbed in me with devotion. And then the next verse he says, if you can't do that, then at least follow the regulations of Bhakti Yoga. And if you can't do that, then at least work for me. Or if you can't do that, then just do some work and offer it for a good cause. If you can't do that, then at least cultivate spiritual knowledge or do meditation. And this way, Krishna gives so many options for people who may not be able to do the highest form of bhakti, but he gives so many options so that slowly people can come to him in different ways. That's the kindness of Krishna. And then I was thinking about, we've mentioned a few classes ago, other devotees have mentioned like Putana, how she came to Krishna with a motive she came disguised as a mother, but her motive was completely unmotherly. She wanted to kill Krishna. But Krishna took that false form that she had and gave her a position as a mother in the spiritual world. So that's the kindness of the Supreme Lord. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also, there's many verses where it's mentioned that akama sarvakamo va mokshakama udharati tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta param. That whether you have all material desires or you have no material desires, it doesn't matter. Anyone can take up the process of bhakti yoga. There's no bar for anybody. So it's even if we at first have a lot of material desires, still we can take up the process, and the process of bhakti yoga will purify one. So again, just that liberal nature of the Lord. Of course, again, it's very important to know that what Kamsa is representing here is exactly the opposite of the mood that we would like to develop, which is the mood of love and devotion to Krishna. Kamsa is developing an unfavorable attitude towards the Lord, and that's not. That is Krishna consciousness that is unfavorable. So in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami mentions the qualities of devotional service, pure devotional service. And he says, Anya bilashita sunyam, that means no material desires. Jnana karma anavridam, that means it's without jnana or karma, it's not mixed with anything. Anukulyena, that means it's favorable. Krishnanushilanam bhaktir uttamam. And it's so it's a favorable, loving devotion to Krishna without any desires for anything else. That is the highest form. But of course, like I said, because maybe not all living entities are ready for that highest form, Krishna gives so many other options for living entities to come to him. And So I would like to read. There's also a few other devotees have spoken on this also in the past, but this is the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In chapter 1, it's mentioned about the people who have inimical feelings towards the Lord and what happens to them. So what happened is in the Rajasuya Yagya, Krishna was, Yudhishthir had this big yagya and he invited everybody, all the kings of the neighboring villages, and everybody was invited. Even Duryodhana was there and all his brothers. And in that yagya, they had to appoint one person as the worshipable person of the yagya. So they appointed, obviously, Krishna as the highest person to be as worshipped in this great ceremony. But Shishupal, who was a cousin of Krishna, but since childhood, it's described, since he was a baby, since the time he could start speaking, babbling, he was saying offensive things about Krishna. That's how offensive he was. He would blaspheme Krishna all the time, and he was so envious of Krishna. So at that Rajasuya Yagya, it's described that he, when Nakula or Sahad, I think Sahadev, began to worship Krishna and wash Krishna's feet and do all the glorify Krishna, Shishupal was sitting there just smoldering in envy and so much just waiting. He actually, I heard in one class, he was actually waiting for that glorification of Krishna to be over, and then he spoke. Why? Because then he could ruin the yagya, because if he had spoken earlier, then they could find someone else to be the worshipable person, and then the yagya could still go on. So he was so envious that he wanted to destroy the functions, or kind of disrupt the functions of the ceremony. He waited, and then when the time came, he stood up and he began to blaspheme Krishna again and again and again and again. And I think Drishta Prabhu was mentioning, or some other devotees were mentioning, that Saraswati went on his tongue, right? And then it makes his words completely opposite, that whatever he said to blaspheme Krishna, Mother Saraswati kind of, or just the acharyas, the way they interpret those statements are all glorifications of Krishna. Yet still, he was going on, and Krishna had made a promise to Shishupal's mother that I won't kill him until he reaches 100 offenses, and then I'll kill him. So he was going on, and Krishna was counting, 99, and then when it came to 100, Krishna took out his Sudarshan chakra and chopped off his head. Now Shishupal's soul came out of his body, and everybody in the whole assembly could see that soul merging into the body of Krishna. And Yudhishthir was very much surprised to see this. Here is a person from the childhood who is blaspheming Krishna, and how is it that he got liberation? Of course, it's a kind of liberation that we as devotees don't aspire for. We don't want to merge into Krishna. We want to serve Krishna. But still, how did he get that? Yudhishthir asked Narada Muni, and he said, how is it possible that Shishupal, who was blaspheming Krishna so much, how could he merge into the body of Krishna and get liberation? And Narada Muni began to explain to Yudhishthir. Right there in the assembly, other people were there listening. Narada Muni, this is the start of the story of Prahlad Maharaj. And I was thinking that, Narada Muni is telling the story of Prahlad, his disciple, and it's going to go on we're actually approaching Nrsimha Chaturdashi. But here Narada Muni was saying, Krishna, unlike us, how we get offended if somebody blasphemes us or criticizes us because we identify with a body, unlike that, Krishna, he doesn't get affected by criticism, blasphemy. He doesn't even get affected by praise. You know how praise, if someone praises us, it inflates our ego, oh, I'm so good. Krishna doesn't have that. So praise or blasphemy, it doesn't affect Krishna. Only thing that Krishna wants is pure love and trying to help the living entities to come to him. So he's always seeing what ways to help the living entity, to purify them, to elevate them. So then Narada Muni was explaining that, so Krishna, he's not affected by blasphemy. He was just seeing that Shishupal is, even in envy, he's absorbed in talking about Krishna. He's absorbed in Krishna. And that's the difference between somebody like Shishupal and Kamsa and somebody, let's say, like King Vena, who was committing a lot of aggressive things to other living entities. But he didn't attain liberation because he was not absorbed in Krishna. But someone who's absorbed in Krishna in any way, Krishna is so kind that he gives him a blissful position in his association. So Narada Muni says, therefore, by enmity or by devotional service, by fear, by affection, or by lusty desire, by all of these or any one of them, if a conditioned soul somehow or other concentrates his mind upon the Lord, the result is the same. For the Lord, because of his blissful position, is never affected by enmity or friendship. And then the next verse, Narada Muni says, by devotional service, one cannot achieve such intense absorption in thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as one can through the enmity toward him. That is my opinion. So Narada Muni is saying, I think that you can even be more absorbed in Krishna if you're envious and angry at him, because it's such a strong emotion that you're just will be thinking about him so much, thinking. Of course, Narada Muni is saying this out of humility, and the purport Prabhupada is saying, because of course somebody like who has pure devotion for Krishna, like Narada Muni, I mean, that is much, much higher than somebody who is envious and angry and fearful of Krishna. But still, the point is that to be overwhelmed with thoughts of Krishna in any way. And then Narada Muni gives that example of the insect who's trapped in a hole, and there's a wasp who's guarding the hole. And the insect is just watching, so much afraid of that wasp who's going to kill him. And because he's watching and looking at that wasp, he takes a form of that being. Similarly, if we are always thinking of Krishna, then we will also come to Krishna. Many persons have attained liberation simply by thinking of Krishna with great attention and giving up sinful activities. This great attention may be due to lusty desires, inimical feelings, fear, affection, or devotional service. I shall now explain how one achieves Krishna's mercy simply by concentrating one's mind upon him. My dear King Yudhishthir, the gopis by their lusty desires, Kamsa by his fear, Shishupal and other kings by envy, the Yadus by their familiar relationship with Krishna, you Pandavas by your great affection for Krishna, and we, the general devotees, by our devotional service, have attained the mercy of Krishna. Somehow, and this is the last statement that Narada Muni tells to Yudhishthir in this connection, that is kind of the summary of this. Somehow or other, one must consider the form of Krishna very seriously. Somehow or other, we must consider the form of Krishna very seriously. Then, by one of the 5 different processes mentioned above, one can return home back to Godhead. Atheists like King Vena, however, being unable to think of Krishna's form in any of these 5 ways, cannot attain salvation. Therefore, one must somehow think of Krishna, whether in a friendly way or inimically. So that's the point. Krishna gives us so many chances and so many opportunities for us to think about him, to be absorbed in him, and so many options. And he's so kind. He just sees the intention. And we are so fortunate that we have, because of Srila Prabhupada's mercy, we have at our fingertips so many ways in which we can become absorbed in Krishna. We can hear classes. We can hear Srila Prabhupada's voice. He's a pure devotee, and we can hear his voice when we hear his lectures. We can read these transcendental books. It's at our fingertips. We can have darshan every day of beautiful Radha Golokananda, and that image of the deities can stay with us throughout the day. We could just meditate on that form. So we're so fortunate, and we have association. Prabhupada created these temples, which are like oases that we can come and we can associate with each other, and we can hear Krishna Katha. We can talk with each other about Krishna. where else can you find this in this world, right? A place where people can exchange such sweet relationships, and we can relish Krishna prasadam, which is food that was sanctified by being touched by Krishna's glance, by Krishna's lips. That food that's transcendental can purify us. All of that we have. We're so fortunate. I was hearing the story about Srinivasacharya. When he came to Jagannath Puri, he was supposed to study Srimad Bhagavatam under Gadadhar Pandit. And Gadadhar Pandit said, I'm sorry, I can't teach you Srimad Bhagavatam because the Bhagavatam is, in those days, the Bhagavatams were written either with ink or even pressed into the leaves, and that all that ink was washed off because of Lord Chaitanya and Gadadhar's tears when they were reading Bhagavatam. And you have to go, he had to walk many, many miles north to the place, I think it was Narahari Chakravarti, to get a new copied of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that was an extensive work because a scribe would have to be there and copy all the verses, and then he had to come back. And I was thinking how fortunate we are that we have this right on our shelf, right? And everyone can have access to this. And it wasn't so easy in those days. Oh, we have it on our phones, that's right. That even, we all carry our phones all the time. We can just pull up a verse, right? We're so, and we probably don't, at least for me, I don't realize how fortunate I am. And just to remember that and to be grateful and to take advantage of it, to be absorbed. We have so many opportunities to be absorbed in Krishna. And another example, I was just reading in Lilamrita. Prabhupada, he went one time to Russia, Moscow, I think, or yeah, Moscow. And he went one time, and I think he only spent maybe a few days, maybe a week, and he met that professor that he always mentions, that Katasky, and that was that didn't have much, that professor couldn't really help him much as far as like giving him opportunities to give lectures or anything like that, because he was government supervised. Everywhere he went, they had to be transported by the government. They were watched very carefully. They were, so it was not something that he could easily preach. He had to be in his hotel room or in a designated place. He was always constantly with somebody from the government because it's the communist times. But then somehow or other, Shama Sundar, when he was walking one day, he would walk hours trying to find food because there's no food available as far as fresh vegetables and fruits. He would have to walk here, okay, to find some oranges, walk all the way here to get some milk and to some fresh fruits. It was almost impossible to find good food. But one time while he was walking, he met one Indian man and a Russian boy, and they saw Shamasundar dressed and they said, they asked him some questions, and Shamasundar invited them to come back to the hotel room to meet Srila Prabhupada. So they came back, and they Srila Prabhupada began to speak to them the Krishna consciousness philosophy, and that the Indian gentleman that was there was also listening, but that Russian person that was there, Ivan, I think, or Ivan, or however you pronounce it, he was listening to Srila Prabhupada as if somebody who's dying of thirst is just drinking water. He was just absorbing every word Srila Prabhupada was saying because it was something that he was craving for. And Srila Prabhupada actually mentioned that sometimes if you have a pot of rice and you want to see if it's cooked, you just pick one grain and you see, that's okay, it's cooked. This one grain is cooked, that means the whole pot is cooked. So he said, from this I can tell that all the youth of Russia are not satisfied with this communist lifestyle, and they're hankering for something more. And if this one boy becomes Krishna conscious, then that could spread, and it will just spread like wildfire in Russia. So for hours, Srila Prabhupada would speak, and then at the end of the day, the boy would go home and then come back the next day, and Prabhupada was just talking to him about Krishna consciousness. And Shama Sundar actually gave that person his own copy of Bhagavad Gita. Somehow or other, that Bhagavad Gita got smuggled. Books were not allowed into Russia. But somehow or other, when Shama Sundar was packing, Malati had thrown in the Bhagavad Gita into his luggage, and somehow it was there, and the authorities hadn't found it. So there was one Bhagavad Gita, and so Shamasundar gave his copy to that boy, and that boy took it home. And secretly, that's how the Krishna consciousness in Russia spread, from that one Bhagavad Gita and that one person that met Srila Prabhupada. Somehow or other, he met some friends. They copied those pages of Bhagavad Gita very secretly and made photocopies, and they would meet in people's houses very, confidentially and share. And that's how. And now in Russia, if you see festivals in Russia, that's the biggest festivals that you will see. 10,000 devotees all chanting the holy names because of that one association with Srila Prabhupada, giving that one mercy to that one person. And so the point is that how that person was absorbing what Srila Prabhupada was saying because of just great hankering for something more, and how that absorption created basically that whole, it sparked interest in thousands of people. So how kind Krishna is to give so many avenues for us to be absorbed in him, and how grateful we should be, and how much we should take advantage when we're reading these stories, not to read them as if, oh yeah, I know this, but to read it as if I've never heard this before, and really visualize it, really try to absorb our consciousness that is in it, and then later, while we're going through our day, to remember that, what we read, what we heard, and share it with somebody. Because when we share it with somebody, it also stays, it sticks with us even more. So those were some points that I wanted to make about absorption and gratitude for all the mercy that we have gotten, so that we don't have to, Kamsa here is, while sleeping, while moving about, while eating, while breathing, he's constantly thinking of the Lord, and he's seeing the Lord in front of him. So maybe we can try, while drinking, we can think Krishna is the taste of water, like Prabhupada said, and we can remember Krishna while drinking. While eating, we can remember Krishna. Krishna, you've given me this nice food that I can relish this, and we can remember the mercy of Krishna. While moving about, we can think about Krishna. Thank you, Krishna, I can move about, I can serve you. While sleeping, before sleeping, we can think, okay, now I'm going to take this rest so I can recharge my body in Krishna's service. In all ways, we can try to absorb ourselves in Krishna. Would anyone like to add anything, or any points about absorption, or any ways that you maybe would like to share about becoming absorbed in the Lord? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's so inspiring. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. Yes. Mm. Yes. All glories. Yes, we can see the eagerness and get inspired by that. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Golokananda ki jai. Govinam Adi Purusham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Enam Kanvanda Aravindanalaya Tatam Bhagavatam Samasitam Buddhasundaram Tandar Bhagو Vidamaniya Vishesha Shobha Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Andaniya Sasakalen Priya Priti Manti Vasyam Vipa Vikayanti Jira Prasanti Ananda Maya Sadhu Jala Vikrasya Govindam Adipurusham Maham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Govindam Adipurusham bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Page 38. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan Shri Govinda Gopinata Madana Mohan Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Kalindi Jamuna Jaya Jaya Mahavan. Keshi Gata Bamshi Bata Dvadashakanan Bamshi Bata Jahasabalila Kailashina Dananda Shinanda Yashoda Jaya Jaya Gopagan Shinanda Yashoda Jaya Jaya Gopagan Shidamadi Jaya Jaya Denuvatsagan Jaya Vrishabhanu Jaya Kirtida Sundari Jaya Vrishabhanu Jaya Kirtida Sundari Jaya Purnamasi Jaya Viranaga Jaya Jaya Gopishvara Vrindavanama Gopishvara Vrindavana Jaya Jaya Krishna Saka Batu Dvijara Jaya Ramagata Jaya Rohini Nandan Jaya Magata Jaya Rohini Nandan Jaya Jaya Brindavana Bashi Jatajan Jaya Dvija Patni Jaya Naga Kanyagan Jaya Japatni Jaya Naga Kanyagan Bhakti Tejahara Paila Govinda Sharan. Shirasa Mandala Jaya Jaya Radha Sham. Shirasa Mandala Jaya Jaya Radha Sham. Jaya Jaya Rasa Leela Sarva Manora. Rasa Leela Jaya Jaya Jvala Rasa Sarva Rasa Sa. Jaya Yo Jvala Rasa Sarva Rasa Sa. Parakiya Bhave Jaha Brajate Prachar. Shri Janava Pada Padma Koriya Smaran. Shri Janava Pada Padma. Dina Krishna Dasa Kohe Nama Sankirtan. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan. Shri Govinda Gopinata Madana Mohan. 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 Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Jaya Radha Goloka Nanda, Radha Goloka Nanda Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Goloka Nanda, Radha Goloka Nanda Shri Radhe. Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Shri Vrindavan Dham. Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Shri Vrindavan Dham. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Shri Shri Radha Golokananda ki jai, Giriraj Maharaj ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo. All glories to Radha Krishna and the divine forest of Vrindavan. All glories to the three presiding deities of Vrindavan, Shri Govinda, Gopinath, and Madan Mohan. All glories to Shamakunda, Radhakund, Govardhan Hill, and the Jamuna River, Kalindi. All glories to the great forest known as Mahavan. All glories to Keshikat, the Vamsivat tree, and the 12 forests of Braj. At these places, the son of Nanda, Shri Krishna, performed all of his pastimes. All glories to Krishna's divine father and mother, Nanda and Yashoda. All glories to the cowherd boys headed by Sridham. All glories to the cows and calves of Braj. All glories to Radha's divine father and mother, Rishabhanu, and the beautiful Kirtida. All glories to Purnamasi, the mother of Sandipani Muni. All glories to the young cowherd maidens of Raj. All glories to Gopishvara Shiva, who resides in Vrindavan in order to protect the holy Dham. All glories to Krishna's funny Brahmana friend, Madhumangal. All glories to Ramaghat, where Lord Balaram performed his rasa dance. All glories to Lord Balaram, the son of Rohini. All glories to all the residents of Vrindavan. All glories to the wives of the proud Vedic Brahmanas. All glories to the wives of the Kaliya serpent. Through pure devotion, they all obtained the lotus feet of Lord Govinda. All glories to the place where the rasa dance of Shri Krishna was performed. All glories to Radha and Sham,